Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Lekan Steven. I want to start this week with an image that, once you sit with it, is going to reframe everything you've been hearing about AI for the last 6 months. Picture a power saw, standard hardware. You pull the trigger, the blade spins, it cuts the wood. The second you let go, it stops. That has been the deal with every piece of software you've ever owned. It does what you tell it, nothing more. Now picture you put that saw down on the workbench at the end of a long day. You go to sleep, and while you're asleep, the saw grows legs. It grabs a bag of nails. It walks out into the yard, and by the time you wake up, it has framed an entire house based on a casual conversation you had with it the day before. That sounds insane. It also sounds, frankly, terrifying, but it's exactly what shipped this week across the AI industry. We've been crossing a quiet but enormous threshold in computing. For about 70 years, the fundamental contract between humans and software has been simple. The machine waits, you act. This week, that contract was officially rewritten. The dominant narrative pivoted away from passive chatbots that answer when spoken to and toward autonomous, always-on agents that actively manage your workflows in the background. I'm going to walk you through what hit the market this week, what it costs, what's pushing back against it, and most importantly, what it means for you and your business. Because if you're not paying attention right now, you're about to be operationally outflanked by competitors who are. Let's get into it. The clearest illustration of the shift came from Microsoft, which launched a product called Scout this week, baked directly into Microsoft 365. The demo character has a human name, Sebastian. That is not an accident. Microsoft wants you to stop thinking of this as software and start thinking of it as a colleague. Sebastian is built on a framework called OpenClaw, and OpenClaw solves what engineers call the amnesia problem. Standard chatbots forget who you are the moment you close the tab. OpenClaw gives an agent a persistent running memory state. It never loses the context of your work. So Sebastian doesn't sit there waiting for a prompt. It is always running. It adapts to your habits. It drafts meeting agendas based on emails you haven't even read yet. It manages your calendar without being asked. Google rolled out the same idea with a personal agent called Spark for Workspace, powered by Gemini 3.5/autonomy. The technical backbone is something they're calling an anti-gravity harness, which is just industry shorthand for a continuous background execution environment. Translation: the agent never shuts down. It stays resident in system memory 24/7, pulling live data streams without you ever hitting enter. You're already seeing the consumer-facing version in Google's new information agents inside search. You aren't really searching anymore. The search is actively working for you. The agent monitors the web continuously for specific updates you care about: a geopolitical news event, a sneaker drop, a regulatory filing. When the agent decides, and it's making that judgment on its own, that the update is significant, it pushes a comprehensive briefing to you. Stop and notice what just happened. The saw didn't just learn to cut, it learned to read your blueprints, watch the weather forecast, and decide on its own when to start framing. But managing your calendar is small potatoes. What happens when the task is so large that one agent isn't enough? This week, Anthropic shipped Claude Opus 4.8, and this is the one that should genuinely make you sit up. They introduced a feature called dynamic workflows. Picture a company with hundreds of thousands of lines of legacy code that needs to be migrated to a modern language. Historically, a nightmare project. Months of engineering time, endless human coordination. With Opus 4.8, Claude doesn't just write code, it acts as the project manager. It analyzes the architecture of the code base. It breaks the migration into hundreds of smaller subtasks. Then it spins up hundreds of parallel sub-agents to execute all of them simultaneously. The main agent verifies the outputs, stitches everything back together, and reports when the whole project is done. No human in the loop while it's happening. In our metaphor, one saw just spawned an entire framing crew of saws, hammers, and nail guns, all coordinating with each other to build the house in parallel. And it's bleeding out of software into the physical world. NVIDIA announced something called NEMA Claw this week, bringing autonomous AI engineers into companies like Dassault and Siemens. The workflow required to mesh a 3D model for aerodynamic testing, something that used to take a human engineering team weeks of meticulous setup, gets compressed into hours. The agent iteratively tests and adjusts simulation parameters thousands of times a minute without any human intervention. Even Meta is monetizing the shift. Their new WhatsApp Business AI agent handles customer support and books appointments. The pricing model is the interesting part. They're charging by token usage. They're not selling a software license anymore. They are literally billing for the AI's thought process. That's a structural shift in how software gets priced, and you're going to see every major vendor follow. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. If you're a CIO or a security lead listening to this, your alarm bell should already be ringing. We're not really upgrading our software. We're hiring 1 million hyperactive, invisible interns who never sleep, never go home, have full access to our servers, and we've handed them the corporate credit card. So what happens when one of those interns hallucinates and emails your confidential financial projections to your entire supplier list? That isn't innovation. That's a catastrophic breach. The industry knows this, which is why the second major trend this week was the rapid emergence of an entire supervisory layer being built to leash these agents. Microsoft introduced the Agent Control Specification, or ACS, an open source standard for governing agent behavior. ACS works by inserting choke points at 3 critical moments: before the agent receives user input, before it decides to use an external tool, and before it sends its final response. At each gate, the agent's intended action gets evaluated against a strict security policy. It's the equivalent of installing safety guards on the saw so it can't accidentally cut off your hand. Alongside ACS, Microsoft launched a testing framework called Assert. The clever part, you write the safety rules in plain English. You just type, "Don't email outside the company," and a secondary constrained language model translates that into a rigorous automated regression test. The system constantly throws edge cases at your agent in a simulated environment and grades whether it actually understands the boundary, regardless of how it gets prompted. NVIDIA approached the same problem from the infrastructure angle. They integrated OpenShell into GitHub Copilot, which locks every agent inside a sandboxed container. The agent can think all it wants inside the box, but the moment it tries to reach a file or the network, that outbound call gets evaluated against policy. And this supervisory layer is birthing an entire market. CoreLogix raised a $200 million Series F this week at a $1.6 billion valuation. Their core product? Software that monitors, troubleshoots, and watches other autonomous AI systems in real time. We're building AI to watch the AI. It sounds absurd, but the alternative is letting your saw framing crew operate without a foreman, and at the speed these systems run, no human supervisor can keep up. This is machine middle management, and it's the fastest growing job category in tech right now. Middle management is expensive, and running the agents that watch the agents requires a volume of compute that strains the imagination. Which brings us to the financial story of the week. Anthropic raised $65 billion in Series H funding, $65 billion with a B. That pushed their post-money valuation to $965 billion against $47 billion in run rate revenue. They also confidentially submitted a draft S-1 to the SEC, preparing for an IPO. But the more revealing detail is what they're doing with the money. They aren't buying chips. They're buying grid-level infrastructure. They signed deals for 5 gigawatts of power capacity with Amazon, another 5 gigawatts of TPU capacity from Google and Broadcom. They partnered with SpaceX for access to massive GPU clusters. That is not how a software company spends. That is how a sovereign entity secures national resources. The saw doesn't run on a wall outlet anymore. It runs on its own power plant. Microsoft and NVIDIA are pushing the same hardware revolution to the edge. The new RTX Spark laptops feature 1 petaflop of AI performance and 128 gigabytes of memory. Microsoft had to literally rebuild parts of Windows so agents could run locally on these machines. For enterprise workloads, they announced the DGX Station for Windows, a desk-side supercomputer with NVIDIA's new GB300 Grace Blackwell chip and 748 gigabytes of coherent memory. Pause on that number, 748 gigabytes. Most high-end machines today run on 32 or 64. Why does a local agent need close to a terabyte of active RAM? Because when an autonomous agent works through a complex problem, it has to hold its entire reasoning trace, your whole code base, and the memory of every previous action in active memory simultaneously. Run out of RAM, swap to disk, and the agent's thinking grinds to a halt. Here's what this means for you. If your hardware budget assumes laptops will last 5 years, you need to rethink that assumption right now. The bar for what counts as a usable business machine just moved. But while the market is pricing Anthropic toward $1 trillion on the assumption that these agents will replace massive swaths of human labor, the CFOs actually paying the bill are starting to put up stop signs. Uber, this week, instituted a hard $1,500 monthly cap per employee on agentic coding tools like Claude Code and Cursor. Why? Because they blew through their entire corporate AI budget in 4 months. When a tool is passive, You only pay when you ask it a question. When an agent runs hundreds of sub-agents autonomously to debug a single problem, it burns through tokens and real corporate dollars at a rate most companies have never had to budget for. Your saw framing crew is fast, but every cut costs money. Paper thought is expensive. This friction is creating a fascinating counter-movement. While the giants build massive generalized models, specialized startups are succeeding by doing the opposite. Ethics AI, founded by former Goldman Sachs and Meta engineers, raised a $3 million pre-seed this week. They're targeting voice AI for customer support across Africa and the Middle East. And instead of building large models, they built tiny, specialized ones. They call them Quora models, ranging from just 300 million to 1.7 billion parameters. The logic is pure physics and economics. If a customer in Lagos or Cairo is speaking to an agent in a local dialect, and that voice data has to round trip to a trillion parameter model in a Virginia data center, the latency is unbearable and the compute cost destroys the unit economics of the call. By running small specialized models closer to the edge, Ethics AI is already handling 17,000 calls a day. It's like Uber buying a Ferrari for every employee just to drive 2 blocks to the grocery store, then wondering why they're out of gas money. Ethics AI realized the bicycle is cheaper, faster, and far better suited for that specific local traffic. The ecosystem is segmenting. Here's what this means for you. If you're an operator, stop assuming you need the biggest model for every job. Match the size of the model to the complexity of the task. Brute forcing every problem with a trillion parameter agent will bankrupt you before it ever delivers an ROI. The moment these agents step outside the corporate sandbox and onto the public internet, they collide with federal law and civil rights. The regulatory layer is the part most operators are ignoring at their peril. President Trump signed an executive order on AI oversight this week, and the evolution of the order is telling. The original draft proposed a mandatory 90-day pre-release review for frontier AI models. After intense pushback, most notably from David Sachs, who argued publicly that strict pre-market bottlenecks would hinder the U.S. in its competition with China, the final order was scaled back to a voluntary 30-day review. No mandatory licensing requirements. Instead, the DOJ has been directed to heavily prioritize enforcement against AI-assisted hacking. The policy bet is clear. Prioritize innovation, prosecute bad actors after the fact, rather than preemptively bottleneck development. But while federal policy leans towards speed, citizens are taking privacy into their own hands. A class action lawsuit was filed in Seattle this week against Amazon Ring over its Familiar Faces feature. The plaintiffs allege Ring illegally collected facial recognition data from millions of people who simply walked past doorbells on the street. This lawsuit cuts straight to the privacy anxiety of the always-on era. For an agent to be helpful, it has to constantly observe. The legal system has not settled how to handle that persistent ambient data collection. Expect more lawsuits like this. In parallel, a new regulation rolled out this week allowing digital publishers to formally opt out of AI search, legally preventing their content from being scraped to feed those continuous Google information agents we talked about earlier. The same architecture is also being deployed defensively. Anthropic is expanding Project Glasswing, using their Claude Mythos preview model to hunt cyber vulnerabilities across 150 organizations in 15 countries, patching holes before human hackers ever find them. Google rolled out a fake call detection feature on Android 12 and newer devices. The exact same machine learning that can generate a convincing deepfake of your family member's voice is now running locally on your phone to detect when you're being scammed. It's an arms race happening silently in our pockets. Dual-use technology cuts both ways. Let me pull all of these threads together. This week, the AI industry quietly stopped selling assistants and started selling autonomous workers. The era of the polite chatbot in a browser tab, waiting for your question, is functionally over for enterprise. We've crossed into the era of the always-on, deeply integrated, infrastructure-heavy agent. An agent that needs its own management layer, its own dedicated supercomputing hardware, its own legal framework just to operate safely in society. So here's what I want you to actually do with this information. If you run a team, start auditing which workflows in your operation can be re-architected around agents this quarter. Not next year, this quarter. The companies doing it now will look unrecognizable in revenue per employee in 18 months. If you're an individual contributor, the skill you should be developing immediately is agent orchestration. The person who can manage a fleet of digital workers, set their goals, monitor their output, leash their behavior, will be worth multiples of someone still trying to manually outproduce them. If If you're an investor, the picks and shovels plays the supervisory layer, core logic style companies, ACS style standards, specialized model startups like Ethics AI. The base layer giants are already priced in. The infrastructure for managing the giants is not. And here is the closing thought I want you to genuinely sit with. If your company inevitably deploys these AI agents to do the heavy lifting and then has to rely on other AI systems to manage, evaluate, and leash those digital workers, at what point does the human become the bottleneck in their own business? That is the only meaningful question for the next decade. When the saw grows legs and starts framing the house on its own, your value is no longer in swinging the hammer. Your value is in deciding which plot of land to build on, knowing which house to build, and knowing when to tell the saws to stop. Thanks for going down this week with me. Pay attention to who's holding the keys. I'll see you on the next.